Welcome, welcome to Understanding Dimensions and Metrics in Google Analytics 4. Let's dive in. Alrighty, so a bit about me before we dive in. I am Manisha Mistry. I'm an instructor at measurementmarketing.io. What does that mean? It means one, I work with our dedicated measurement marketing clients so they can harness the power of their marketing data. I work with them so they can have actionable dashboards, so they can have useful dashboards. I am passionate about sharing my knowledge, so you will see me active in Winner Circle, in Ask an Instructor, where I am helping members get unblocked. I'm helping members move forward in measurement strategy. And finally, I'm proficient in Looker Studio, BigQuery, Analytics Canvas. I love those topics, so if you do want to talk those, know that I'd happily geek out with you. Okay, so let's first talk about the Measurement Marketing Academy. The Measurement Marketing Academy is our flagship product, okay? It is where you can learn measurement strategy. We have win courses, we have workshops, we have tools. I'm actually going to talk about a tool that's back there for you Academy members, guys. Okay, so stay tuned for that. We are back there in Ask an Instructor. What is Ask an Instructor? It's your ability to send in live videos to our instructor team. Our instructor team, Julie, me, Mercer, we're live, we're back there. We're watching your videos you send us an Ask an Instructor, and we are sending you videos back. Right? So think about how valuable that is. You're blocked, and it's basically like us coming over and looking over your shoulder and saying, hey, let's chat. Okay? Now, before we dive in, because I'm guilty of this, I really like to mention this. One thing. Remember the concept of one thing. It's so important. I am totally guilty of this, where I, do a training, I try to grab everything, and then I grab nothing. Let's be honest. When you go and say to yourself, I'm going to grab one thing, you're going to grab one thing. You're going to go implement that one thing, and then you're going to come back, you're going to watch again, and you're going to implement another one thing. Before you know it, you're going to string together a bunch of one things, and you're going to have a million things, but you're going to be good at all of them because you strung them together slowly. Okay. Now, I'm excited to dive in, and I hope you are too, into understanding dimensions and metrics in Google Analytics 4. Let's start. Before we dive in, let's talk about our measurement marketing framework. Our framework helps you go from marketing in the blind to marketing where you can reliably grow revenue and profit. Now, our framework has 3 key steps: plan, build, and launch. Plan is all about questions, information, and actions. Knowing your questions, knowing the information you need, and the actions you're going to take. That is super important. Build is all about understanding your traffic and your results, and then having it tell a story. You want your results and your traffic to kind of linger together and tell you a story. Finally, launch is about listening to that story. What is that story saying? But more importantly, and the part that I think is so important, is forecasting what that story is going to do tomorrow, next week, 2 weeks from now, a month from now, because that's the power. You're not looking backwards, you're looking forwards now, right? And finally, optimizing. To learn more about this, you can go to measurementmarketing.io. I'm going to give you some tips on how to get some free resources to get started on this at the end. Let's dive in now. Okay, so let's talk about the concept that every visualization starts with a table. Every visualization starts with a table. Drawing in a notebook, if you were to do a quick drawing like this, behind these is a table. Behind this Excel or Google Sheet, fancy pie chart is a table, right? Basic table. Now, let's do an example. So here is a pie chart. We've all seen pie charts like this, right? This pie chart is telling you here's the number of people in each state: Texas, New York, Arizona, Ohio, and Florida. Behind this pie chart is a table, a single row. A single row on this table, Ohio 20, is represented by a piece of pie on this pie. And that's the largest piece, right? Because that's the highest number. As you can see, all the other numbers are less than 20. Another row, New York, which is 10 people, half of Ohio, is represented by another piece of pie that is half the size of the Ohio piece of pie. Okay? Now, you can take this table, visualize it as a pie chart, but you can also make that pie chart disappear and visualize the same table as a bar chart, right? So now, instead of showing it as slices of pie, you're showing it as bars. Ohio, which is 20 people, is represented by a bar that goes from 0 to 20, right? And New York, which is 10 people, is represented by a bar that goes from 0 to 10. As you can see, New York's bar is half the size of Ohio. Again, visually, you can see that in the visualization, but in the table, you see it with numbers. So, exact same table, bar chart, pie chart, right? So the key to remember when you are especially working with data, GA4 data, through the API, any of those tools, we're going to talk about a few of them in a minute. The key to remember is that behind every visualization is a table. Okay? That's so key. Ahmad Kanati says this in his training. My SQL professor in third year used to say that to all the time. It is so critical to know this. Now, why is this important? Why do you need to know this, right? That's really a question everybody's asking. Well, if you're working in any of the tools, Mix Analytics, Google Sheets, Analytics Canvas, BigQuery, GA4, Explorations, you are building answers to your questions as a table. You got that right. Then you are using Looker Studio to visualize that table. That's really important because at the end of the day, that visualization in Looker Studio is powered by a table behind it, and that table you're building in any one of the tools we mentioned. Now, let's talk about the parts and pieces of a table. So the first part of a table is a dimension, right? What is a dimension? A dimension are the attributes of the data. They define the groupings and distributions of a metric. So here you go. Here's the table. Which one is the dimension? The dimension in this case is how the data is grouped, which is states. There are 5 states listed here, and we can see each of those states. And our data, our metric, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is grouped by those states. I said that I was going to talk about metrics. There we are, metrics, right? A metric, what's a metric? They are the quantitative values of the dimension. Think how much. That's the best way to explain a metric, okay? So again, we have this data, we have the states, which is our dimension. Our metric is people. So each row is telling us in Texas, the state of Texas, there's 5 people. In the state of Arizona, there's 15 people. Now, it's great to look at this data and understand it, but it's really important for us to go into some GA4 examples because that is the data many of us are dealing with day to day. So let's start with a question. How many sessions broken down by date? When you get a question like this, it's important to step back and ask yourself, what dimensions and metrics do I need to answer this question? You will need to know the dimensions and metrics so that when you go into GA4 explorations, when you will write your query in BigQuery, you're easily able to then build stuff because you know your dimensions and metrics. So let's look at this question together and let's ask ourselves, what are the dimensions we need to answer how many sessions broken down by date? Well, your dimension in this case is, you got that right, date. Okay. Now, what's your metric? Your metric, how many sessions broken down by date? Your metric is sessions. So let's talk about the table. So before we visualize it, throw a bar chart up, a pie chart up, let's just talk about the table, okay? How many sessions broken down by date? Your dimension is date, your metric is sessions, and voila, you have a table with the dimension date and the metric sessions. And you get that table, and as you can see, our metric session is grouped by each date. April 1st, we had 1 session. April 2nd, we had 2 sessions. April 3rd, we have 3 sessions, right? Alrighty. Now, let's do another question. How many sessions broken down by date and session source? This is a very common question, and we're all asked this from our clients, from ourselves, right? Everyone has this question. Well, how many sessions did I get today from Facebook or from Google? That's exactly the question you're answering right here. What's the first question you ask yourself? What dimensions and metrics do I need to answer this question? So let's do this together, guys, okay? So how many sessions broken down by date and session source? Your dimensions, you actually have 2 dimensions here because your data is actually going to be grouped by two different dimensions. It's going to be grouped by date and it's going to be grouped by session source because you're going to have it on this date, let's say April 1st, from Facebook, you got X number of sessions. Now, leading to my next point, metrics. What's your metric? How many sessions broken down by date and session source? Sessions is your metric. Now, let's build the table together because as I mentioned, every single visualization, before we get fancy, let's get our basic table. So what is our basic table? What are our dimensions and metrics for how many sessions broken down by date and session source? So in this case, our dimensions are date and session source, and our metric is sessions. Our table, voila, right? We now have our table, right? And our table has 2 dimensions, date and session source, and 1 metric, which is sessions. So as you can see, it says it. On April 1st, we had 1 session, and that session came from Facebook. On April 2nd, we had 2 sessions. 1 of them came from Google, and 1 of them came from Direct, right? And on April 3rd, we had 3 sessions, 2 from YouTube and 1 from Direct. Alrighty, let's get a little bit more complicated, okay? Let's talk about a more complicated question, but again, a very normal question for you or your clients to ask you. How many sessions captured a lead broken down by date and session source? So this is almost a question of, hey, how many leads did I get and when did I get them and what sources did they have? That's kind of like the quick way. And then the way you want to really word that question for yourself is how many sessions captured a lead. So how many sessions captured a lead broken down by date and session source? So first question you got to ask yourself. You guys should be ringing into the set. You should be like screaming at the monitor saying, oh yeah, I need to ask myself what dimensions and metrics do I need to answer the question. So how many sessions captured a lead broken down by date and session source? So right away from the previous question, I'm pretty sure you're like, I know I need the dimensions, date and session source. But what there is another dimension you need. You need the dimension that's going to tell you a lead was captured. So let's talk about that. What dimension will tell you that? So think about that for a second. Which one? Well, in this case, the dimension that'll tell you that is event name. And what you need to do is narrow down to a specific event. But the dimension you need is event name. So now, the three dimensions you need to answer this question is date, session source, and event name. Yes, we're going to filter it down to a specific event, but that's really what you need. Now, let's talk about what metrics you need. How many sessions captured a lead broken down by date and session source? The metric here is sessions. So now, let's build our table. Because remember, before we get fancy, we need to build our table. So our table for this question, how many sessions captured a lead broken down by date and session source, has three dimensions: date, session source, event name, and one metric, which is session. So our metric session is going to be grouped by date, session source, and event name. So let's throw that table. Here we go. And it has three dimensions: date, source, event name, and one metric. So as you can see, it can easily show you that on Pacific Day, April 1st, we had a Facebook as our source, we had a session start, and then we had a page view. So the metric sessions is actually broken down, as you can see, that one session had multiple events. And we're going to talk a bit about that in a few minutes through the concept of now, let's talk about it, grouping and distribution of the metric by dimension. So right there is a very interesting concept. So depending on your dimensions, your metric may be grouped or distributed. So let's dive into that a little. Okay, so we have a table here, and it has date and sessions. Our metric sessions, if you add them up, you have 6, right? 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. The metric sessions is grouped by date. Now, let's take a pause for a second. Because, a few minutes ago we saw another table like this, right? This was a really popular, lots of rows. But at the end of the day, when you sum sessions here, it sums to 13. Interesting. The metric sessions is distributed by event name. So it was the same underlying quote unquote, let's say GA4. But depending on the table we produced, our metric sessions summed very differently. So let's look at those side by side together. Let's kind of look at these. So table 1. How many sessions we have each day? That answers that question, right? You can look at this and you can say on April 1st, I had 2 sessions. Sorry, you had 1 session. And on April 2nd, I had 2 sessions. You can easily look at that table and you know that answer. And you can visualize this as a bar chart, a pie chart, all those kind of charts. Do a line chart, your choice, right? This other table, which is, I'm going to say a blown up version of that first table, answers the questions, how many sessions fired a particular event each day? Very, very different questions. Now, let's break it down a little bit more so we can both look at these tables together. Okay, so I'm going to dive in a little deeper here, guys, okay? Stay with me. Okay, so here we have it. We have the 2 tables. We just kind of flipped where they were, okay? So we have this very broken down distributed table, right? And then we have a condensed table. Now, let's look at these together. So in one table, it says on April 1st, you had 1 session, okay? But then on the other table, it says April 1st. It says 1 session, but it says 1 session, but that 1 session is now broken down, as you can see, by 2 events, session start and page view. Those are actually connected. And what they actually show you is of the 1 session on April 1st, there were 2 events. Both occurred in the same session. So basically, somebody showed up on your site from Facebook. They started the session, they viewed a page, and left. That's all they did. Okay? Now, let's go a little bit deeper because it gets a little bit more complicated. Okay, so as you can see, it's broken down and broken down. Now, let's go a little deeper. Let's talk about April 3rd. That's an interesting one, right? So April 3rd breaks down, and as you can see right here, April 3rd had 3 sessions. And then you have those 3 sessions broken down, right? So of the 3 sessions on April 3rd, the generate lead event occurred during 2 of the 3 sessions. Let's kind of visualize that. Let's look at that together right there. See that? So of the 3 sessions on April 3rd, 2 of them generated a lead. The other 2 had a session start and a page view, but they didn't generate a lead, meaning somebody showed up on your site from YouTube. For all 3 cases, they showed up on your site from YouTube. They did something on your site and they left. But 2 of those sessions, 2 of those, interactions generated a lead. Now, what does that mean? It means in addition to asking, what dimensions and metrics do I need to answer this question? You also need to ask, you really need to ask, how will my metrics be grouped or distributed with the dimensions? It's really, really important. And to help you on this journey, because trust me, we all struggled with this internally as our instructor team too. We still do. There's still days where we can sit around the table and we're like, if we open it like, if we slice and dice like this, we still have that discussion, right? Let's go through some examples. And that's really the way you get really good at this, is going through examples and kind of just trying and testing your knowledge. And hey, if you want to do that and ask an instructor with us, we are totally game too. You want to do it in word circle, do it in word circle. Like, we love that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's dive in. The first question, how many sessions broken down by date, session source, session median, session campaign? This is a really popular question. We all know this is asked, right? So, let's make sure we know the dimensions and metrics you need to answer this question. So first, the dimensions. You need 3 dimensions here. Session source. You need 4 dimensions here. You need date, session source, session median, and session campaign. So those are 4 dimensions you need. What's your metric? Your metric is sessions. So let's look at that together. So your dimensions is date, session source, session median, session campaign, and your metric is sessions. You can even add the other 2 UTMs here, campaign and term, and they would be your dimensions. So let's show you that table. So this is the final table. We actually exported this table live from our GA4. These are your dimensions. These are your metrics. And in this case, when you look at one row, the metric sessions is grouped by the session source, session median, and session campaign that identify the origin of the session. You basically get, for every single session you have in GA4, most times you have one source median campaign, right? And one set of UTM. So if you were to look at this, it would say on this, January 1st, 2023, we had 44 sessions that came from direct. Let's go through another question, okay? And like I said, going through these questions is what makes you really good at this. How many sessions broken down by date, session source, session median, session campaign, and events? And again, very, very common question, especially as we move into the event world with GA4. What are your dimensions? You have 5 dimensions there. Date, session source, session median, session campaign, and events. That was a mouthful. Alrighty, so let's look at our metric. Our metric, the question kind of gives it to you, right? How many sessions? So right there, how many. It's a quantitative, right? It's how many sessions. So sessions is your metric. So let's look at that together. So again, 5 dimensions: date, session source, session median, session campaign, and event name, and your metric is sessions. Now let's look at that table together. Okay, so here's that table. Now, again, you have your dimensions, you have your metric. Now, the metric session is distributed by the event name that can occur in a session. So depending on a session, remember, a session can have many events, meaning that session metric 1 could be replicated, right? It's distributed, right? So when you look at this table, it's saying, oh, there's a session, it came from MMIO, it came from resources, it came from Academy, right? And these are the events. So it had an Academy Aware, it had a page view, it had an impression, it had a test Academy, it had a session start, it had a first view. So one session can have multiple events tied to it, and therefore that metric sessions is distributed. Let's go through another example. These are a little bit more complicated, but you know what? You're ready for it, so dive in with me, okay? How many sessions broken down by date, host name, and page path. Very different from our normal questions like of source, medium, campaign, right, or events. But this is again a common question, right? A lot of clients may have multiple host names. A lot of clients want to know that on a certain day, how many people saw a certain page, right? Dimensions, guys, what are your dimensions? 3 dimensions here. Date, host name, page path. 3 dimensions. Metric, you got that right. Sessions. Okay, so there we have it. We have our dimensions, we have our metrics, right? And I know you're dying to look at that table, so I'm not going to hold you back. Here's that table, right? Here is that table. It's showing you host, page path, session. Here's your dimensions, here's your metrics. Now, in this case, the metric sessions is distributed by the different host names and different page paths that can occur. Now, how does that work? Because you have to remember, in that session, I'm going to view multiple pages, potentially, right? I'm going to view multiple pages. So that metric sessions is now distributed by how many pages I viewed in that session. Alrighty? And right there, you can see that, right? There you go. It's saying there's 20 sessions that saw the page, our members page, right? Okay. Now, let's ask another question. How many sessions broken down by date, scroll percentage, host name, and page path? This is a really interesting question because many of us who've set up Scroll have set it up for, that multiple 10, 20, 10, 25, 50, 75, 90, right? So you're going to have a distributed metric here, but let's go through that, okay? So your dimensions: date, scroll percentage, host name, and page path. Metric, again, sessions, how many, your quantitative. So here are your dimensions and metrics, right? Date, scroll depth, host name, page path, and sessions. Now, let's look at this together because it's a little bit of a complicated table, okay? So your dimensions, and this is your metric. So the metric sessions is distributed twice here. That's the one thing to look at this table. First, it's distributed by the host names and page paths that can occur in a session. So meaning that I can view multiple pages and multiple different host names in a session. The other place it's distributed is that individual page can have multiple scrolls fire, right? Because it'll fire for 10 and fire for 25. So then when you look at this, it's saying on this January 1st date, for the host name measurementmarketing.io, for the page, certified measurement marketers, we had a 10% scroll fire for one session. And if you later were to, look again for that same page, you may find a 20 with that exact same data for the dimensions. And then the percent scroll would be just 20, and it'll be one session. That's how the distribution happens. So you have to remember, the key to remember is you've got to ask certain questions when you are looking at your questions. You've got to ask yourself, what dimensions and metrics do I need to answer the question? And then you've got to ask yourself, how will my metrics be grouped or distributed? That's really important, grouped or distributed with the dimensions I'm picking. Now, we wanted to make your journey a little bit easier in this. So we've come up with the Google Analytics 4 Dimensions and Metrics Guide for our member. So if you're a member of the Toolbox, member of the Academy, you're going to have access to it. So let's dive in and go look at that together. Okay, so here I am. Once you log in, Toolbox members, Academy members, you log into the Toolbox and then you come down here and you go to the word Toolbox, okay? I have it loaded here, but I'm actually just going to reload it so you can see me do this from scratch, okay? So you can give this a second to load, and then once it loads, what you want to do is you want to come here. See this top has a few different bars? Academy members, Toolbox members, you want to click on Google Analytics. Once you click on Google Analytics, what you're going to look for in there is the Google Analytics 4 Dimensions and Metrics Guide. When you click on this, you get this amazing, amazing PDF. I'm going to scroll up and show you how it looks, okay? It's a Google Analytics 4 Dimensions and Metrics Guide. So when you scroll down in here, I'm going to make this just a bit bigger. Here we go. Here it is. Okay, so you can see it because I really want you to see it. So we have similar concepts of what is a dimension, what is a metric, but we also have common questions. So as you scroll through here, we'll show you the question, the common question, the dimensions, the metrics you need. And this is super helpful if you're building in Explorations, if you're building with the API, in Mix Analytics, those kind of tools. And especially if you're in the wonderful world of BigQuery, understanding your dimensions and metrics is so helpful. You can download this, guys. Like I said, you're going to come to Toolbox, you're going to Google Analytics, and you can click right here. You can download it, keep a copy for yourself, and have it handy. Alrighty, so what was your one thing? As you went through it, was your one thing that everything is a table, every visualization is a table, and just getting your head around that concept. I know the first time, a couple times I went through this, I was like, okay, I get it. But just going through it again and again kind of reinstates that. And I personally find that every time I go through this, I teach this, or I go through my queries and I start thinking about my questions as dimensional metrics, I almost get stronger and faster at answering questions. So definitely a huge help. Now, if you liked this and you want more, hit the subscribe button now, okay? We have tons of great content coming for you, so you gotta stay tuned. Finally. Now, at the start of this session, I talked about the Measurement Marketing Framework. I talked about measurementmarketing.io and where you can learn more about this, where you can also get access to free tools, just like the tools I mentioned, right? That Dimensions and Metrics Guide. Now, if you want to take a look at that, if you want to take a look at joining the Academy, I got a short link for you. It is measure.tips/getacademy. Go there, get access to it, get access to the tools, and you can dive in. Alrighty, so there you have it. Understanding dimensions and metrics in Google Analytics 4.